Good morning and welcome to the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative Technical Assistance Coffee Chat, a model climate vulnerability assessment for municipalities. My name is Amanda Archer and I will serve as your facilitator today. I work for the Jack Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve and we are a member of the New Jersey CRC. For those who are here for the first time, the New Jersey CRC is a network of coastal resilience professionals, and the purpose of this coffee chat program is to better facilitate connections between local communities and decision makers with NJCRC members to build capacity towards resilience. I also serve as a New Jersey CRC workgroup lead for technical assistance coffee chats. The NJCRC has many other work groups that range from ecosystem monitoring to municipal planning. If you are interested in becoming a member of the NJCRC, which is free, it does allow you access to participate in these work groups and connect with resilience practitioners from a wide variety of sectors. I'd just like to remind everyone that the views expressed during this technical assistance coffee chat are the presenter's own and do not reflect the official policies or positions of the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative or any of its organizational partners. I ask that all participants please stay on mute while our speakers are presenting. If you have any questions, you may put them in the chat and we will circle back to ask those at the end. Today's coffee chat is about conducting a local climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment to protect and strengthen your community, all while meeting municipal land use law requirements. A new comprehensive guide and other resources for climate adaptation planning will be discussed by our panel of speakers today. Megan Levy is a lead planner for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, Office of Climate Resilience. She works on local planning programs that will provide funding and technical assistance to municipalities across New Jersey through Resilient New NJ. Tanya Roback is a community planning manager at New Jersey Future. Tanya ensures accuracy and targeted approaches to land use initiatives to help communities implement smart planning policies and practices that foster resilient and vibrant places for all community members. And last but not least is Ann Healsley. She is the program manager for policy and planning at Sustainable Jersey. Ann works with partners to develop policies and programs that assist local governments in implementing sustainable actions. Collaboration between our panelists and other statewide partners led the development of a guide to local climate change adaptation planning, providing a model climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment and planning process for New Jersey municipalities. This guide is intended as a foundational step for ongoing local climate adaptation planning and resilience efforts supported by the NJDEP and partner organizations. Members of the NJCRC also provided guidance and feedback throughout the development of this guide. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Megan Levy.
Thank you, Amanda. Share my screen. And hopefully everyone is seeing the appropriate slide.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Just bring my, all right. So thank you, everyone. I'm Megan Levy. I am the lead planner for the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning, and I oversee the Resilient NJ program, as well as some of the offices of other planning assistance programs. So the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning is led by Nick Angarone, who is the New Jersey Chief Climate Resilience Officer, who manages the DEP Climate Resilience Planning and New Jersey Blue Acres program. And I'm here to provide an overview of reports, laws that direct our resilience planning efforts, and share some of our programs and tools that are available to assist communities with their resilience planning efforts, and also in meeting the new Municipal Land Use Law climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment requirements. So just to give you a brief overview, we're going to start with Executive Order 89, which was directed by Governor Murphy to develop a scientific report on climate change based on existing data and the best available science regarding the current and anticipated environmental effects of climate change in New Jersey. The scientific report was released in June of 2020, and it takes this global issue of climate change right into our backyards with New Jersey specific information. We've updated our understanding of climate impacts in New Jersey multiple times since then, including our own extreme precipitation projections and the impacts of climate change on human health and communities. This information is critical as we build infrastructure, develop our cities and towns, and connect with our communities. We often think about the destruction caused by storms such as Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Ida when thinking about climate change, but we need to think about the impacts much more broadly. In addition to the climate change, the science report that was released in 2020 and the addendum in 2022, we've also released a easier to understand web-based tool using an Esri story map collection. This was released in September of 2023, and I've added the links to the top of this presentation so you can explore that if you haven't done so already. So building off the science report, we had to include the development of a statewide climate change resilience strategy. This strategy serves as a framework for DEP and all state agencies that are making for their decision making around climate resilience. This is promoting long-term resilience in all parts of life in New Jersey: the economy, communities, natural resources, infrastructure, and also through the actions the state government will take itself. So in October of 2021, the New Jersey statewide climate resilience strategy and coastal resilience plan were released. And one of the most important things that this strategy did was define resilience for New Jersey. The definition is really a melding of resilience and adaptation, indicating that we are not just bouncing back, but we are also going to bounce forward. So the climate change resilience strategy is a policy framework that includes forward-looking state policies that address some of our vulnerabilities to climate impacts and help us strengthen resilience in New Jersey. There are 6 priority areas that contain over 125 actions to guide New Jersey state agencies. And you can see they're listed here on the screen. So many of these actions also call specifically for DEP to support municipalities with their climate resilience planning. Since some of the examples here to help integrate resilience into local planning and regional planning, to incorporate natural and nature-based solutions for resilience, to engage local governments and other partners to develop resilient solutions, amongst other things, include to incentivize and support community resilience planning. So it's important that the resilience strategy is meant just to provide these recommendations on how New Jersey state agencies can make changes to enhance resilience, but it's not necessarily prescriptive as to how the specific program should make those changes. And for that reason, that is also why the strategy is a living document, and it will be updated approximately every 2 years. For example, something that has resulted from this work is also the Strategic Climate Action Plan for the NJDEP. This was in response to Executive Order number 100, and where the department was directed to identify specific rules, guidance documents, and other regulatory mechanisms that can be better integrated into climate change by looking at the department's regulatory and permitting programs. So this is a first step in us in DEP also taking its role very seriously in combating climate change and supporting climate resilience efforts. So at the state level, we've done a lot of work to support some planning in climate resilience, but what about planning at the municipal level? So at the municipal level, in recognition of the critical need for climate science to inform land use planning, in February of 2021, Governor Murphy signed into public law, PL 2021, Chapter 6 of the Municipal Land Use Law, amending it to include a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. So effective immediately, municipalities were required to incorporate a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment into any master plan land use element adopted after the signing of this bill, after the signing of the order. Municipalities must consider environmental effects associated with climate change, including but not limited to extreme weather, temperature, drought, fire, flooding, and sea level rise, and contain measures to mitigate reasonably anticipated natural hazards such as coastal storms, shoreline erosion, storm surge, and wind. The law also requires the EP to provide technical assistance as practicable, which grounds many efforts that were already underway as part of our larger resilience planning efforts. Here we go. So listed on this slide are the 7 key components of the MLUL. I know it's a lot of text, but 5 of these 7 are data-driven activities, and including looking at build-out analysis of future residential, commercial, and industrial and other development, identification of critical facilities in utilities and roadways, analysis of current and future threats to and vulnerabilities of a municipality associated with climate change related natural hazards. So in this aspect, we are looking at creating a vulnerability assessment to assess for all risks, assess risk for all hazards, in order to be able to determine which infrastructure is also needed to necessary for sustaining a good quality of life and to help the community move forward as they are impacted further along by different climate hazards. I'm quickly going to go through some programs and resources that we currently have at the DEP that may also hopefully either you will be able to participate in or may help you along your climate resilience planning journey. So our first is the Resilient NJ Regional Planning Program. It was launched in 2020. And the goal was to produce community-led resilience and adaptation action plans. There are 4 regions that are involved in this project. They are actually continuing on doing their work. Their resilience action plans were actually completed in October of 2022. But they are also now moving forward with implementing some of the actions that were put into those plans, hoping to extend their climate resilience planning efforts beyond even having studies and feasibility studies and other plans written. So overall, we have our regional planning program, which is our flagship resilience program, which I have mentioned about the 4 regional plans. We also have, we also plan on continuing with regional planning as funding becomes available. Following in a similar vein and process is the Municipal Assistance Program. In the Municipal Assistance Program, we are providing direct resilience planning assistance to individual municipalities, mostly in the coastal zone due to some of the funding restrictions that we have for coastal zone management. But we've also been able to leverage some funding through New Jersey State corporate business tax to help some towns that may not fit into that category. So one part of this we were doing with the municipal assistance program that wasn't necessarily part of the regional planning program at the time of its creation is to incorporate the Municipal Land Use Law CCR HVA requirements into the planning process. We currently have 5 towns that are have finished up or will be finishing up their plans, resilience action plans in the spring. And then we have a new round of projects that are going to be happening in 3 separate towns, including Harrison Town, Lambertville, and Montclair, as well as 11 communities along the Route 130 corridor in Burlington County, who'll be working on a multi-municipal climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment to address not only their individual municipal climate resilience issues, but also regional ones as well. I'd also like to just bring to your attention another tool that we have available, the tool we have available through NJDEP and the Office of Climate Resilience is the Local Planning for Climate Change Toolkit, which is a comprehensive planning resource which outlines the necessary steps and associated resources to allow municipalities to undertake their own own resilience planning efforts associated with the updated municipal land use law requirements. I'm going to just draw your attention to, you can see on the screen, there's 5 steps. The third one, which is the understanding vulnerability section, which is also section 2 of this, of the toolkit. So for the purposes of addressing these new CCRHV requirements, we have this section of the toolkit, which is focused on providing communities with several tools, to help evaluate criteria to assist you with your assessing your community's overall vulnerabilities. There's also a helpful tools and data section that's included in the toolkit to help you identify climate-related hazards and assessing for social and economic vulnerabilities, ecosystem vulnerabilities, and it can be a great place to start if a municipality is looking to conduct their own vulnerability assessment. A little over, so I don't have too many more slides. Another thing I'd like to just draw you to is the website that is for the climate change website for all of New Jersey DEP. And it's not limited to just resilience planning. It's for the entirety of all of our climate work that is done. But I just want to draw your attention to the resources tab, which includes data tools and web apps, as well as a section for reports and DEP grants and loan programs, with links to other state agency opportunities as well. These things include items like the New Jersey Coastal Ecological Restoration and Adaptation Planning Tool, as well as the Environmental Justice Mapping and Assessment and Protection Tool. And then lastly, if you would like to just go straight to the heart of finding your data, you can also go to the DEP Bureau of GIS. They have an open data site where you can download all available DEP data, as well as an application gallery for the web apps that the Bureau has put together. And you can actually simply do a search in there for climate, and it will lead you to all of the potential tools that are available. So with that, I am finished, and I believe you will now hear from Tanya Rohrbach.
Thank you, Megan. Now we'll have Tanya Rohrbach from New Jersey Future, and she will help tie in some of the New Jersey DEP initiatives that help create this municipal guide.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the guide. Hopefully you're seeing my slides okay. So in partnership with Sustainable Jersey and collaboration with DEP, we just released this guide to local climate change adaptation planning. You can find the guide online at our New Jersey Future website. We have a QR code here, but it's probably easier to download it on your computer so that you're not trying to download it to your phone. But we only ask when you go to get it that you complete a very brief survey of just a few questions and provide us your email so that we can do some follow-up and make improvements to the guide. So just want to point out that this is an evolving document and resource, and there were a lot of stakeholders involved in the creation of it. So it has a lot of content, and we want to do that follow-up. So just a little bit about the guide generally in terms of the audience and its purpose and design. It is designed for the practitioner. So the main component of this guide is the outlined process and detailed methodologies for analyzing vulnerabilities to climate hazards. As Megan explained, this is for a vulnerability assessment, so it has that methodology detail and is a resource that is designed for practitioners in various roles to use while going through that process. So it is a process-oriented resource. It's organized to provide resources where you would encounter the need for them in that process. And it is a pretty comprehensive planning process to conduct a climate vulnerability assessment. But the guide doesn't really necessarily expect that every town is going to go through that process in the same way or at the same level necessarily. So there is flexibility built into it for approaching it in different ways to go through that process. So it is very practical because It's going to help towns meet those MLUL, those Municipal Land Use Law requirements Megan described. But it's also going beyond the MLUL requirements. And that's ultimately what needs to be done. So this guide aims to make it easier for towns to do both those things, meet those requirements, and also do things a little deeper. So it's organized based on a planning process that falls into 3 parts. It starts with gearing up and scoping, goes on to analyzing vulnerabilities and prioritizing strategies to address the vulnerabilities identified. And then to the last part of implementation, which isn't, shouldn't really be considered as a discrete part with beginning and end, because that's really about maintaining ongoing efforts to reduce vulnerabilities and be climate ready in the communities. So throughout the guide, there is a focus on socially vulnerable populations and addressing disparities in the community. So you will see a little icon dedicated to community engagement activities to help you make the vulnerability assessment in the community that you're doing it for an equitable process. And everything involving analysis of vulnerabilities in the guide is organized in particular phases and steps around a systems approach. And this is a framework for addressing and kind of tackling the complexity of climate change impacts that affect all aspects of our day-to-day lives and all parts of our society that we rely on for everyday life. And these things are affected by multiple kinds of climate hazards. So there's a lot to contend with, and we've just organized that into a systems framework. So the guide walks through analysis of features in the built, natural, social, economic, and governance systems that support the community based on that framework. So the process is going to yield the vulnerability assessment, and it's also going to yield tools for actionable outcomes. So you're also going to get, aside from the vulnerability assessment, lists for mitigation projects as you go through this process, lists for adaptive capacity actions that a community can take. And then, of course, strategies and design standards, which the identification of strategies and design standards is one of the provisions of the MLUL. So that is important and a main output of the process of going through a vulnerability assessment. And then, all of these can go into an action plan for resilience and adaptation, and then integrate with other plans and efforts, similar to the work that Megan was describing that's going on in the Resilient NJ program. So part 1, just kind of take you through the parts a little bit. It walks you through that gearing up and scoping. This is where you're going to start to kind of build this process and put these pieces in place and really kind of figure out how to do this with efficiency and collaboration. So you're going to compile data and information about a community, and that's going to help prepare you with that background information and knowledge to go into the analysis of vulnerabilities. So you will have the appropriate levels of knowledge and information about the community, and also appropriate levels of stakeholder engagement as you dive into that analysis component. So as you're starting in these beginning phases, just want to have you think about a few questions to get started. The first is, what depth will you go into? A good vulnerability assessment includes all these components, not just, a strict technical analysis, also engaging community and stakeholder, and not only looking at certain selective hazards or assets. So as Megan described, there's a whole suite of hazards that impact communities. So we have seen vulnerability assessments that are more on the minimal side, maybe just looking at only a FEMA flood map and including some information about historical flooding from the hazard mitigation plans. But in reality, most towns are probably going to need to go deeper, going to need to look at other hazards besides just flooding, look at projected hazards, and look at other features besides just built infrastructure. So think about, kind of all those things as you're getting started with this. And then think about the end product and then what's going to come out of this. We've seen some examples, maybe there's just a bit of information about hazards kind of attached separately to the master plan without any integration or connection to the master plan. And ultimately, the vulnerability assessment is really the basis of the master plan, right? And it's got to get integrated into the land use plan element. For some towns, maybe this is not going to happen the first time you do this assessment and try to tackle this, and maybe this happens over time, but you want to think about how you're ultimately going to get to that point of integration with the master plan. And another big thing to consider is who's going to do this work. The first steps of the guide have to do with setting up the lead, making sure you have technical expertise to do the level of depth that you need in a community. And then, so you want to think about the expectations at the start of a vulnerability assessment. Who's going to do that work? Leading the project, analyzing vulnerabilities, and engaging the community. Those are main components of what has to happen in this process. So part two is where the meat of the material is for methodology to analyze different features in the community and assess their vulnerabilities to climate hazards. So this, in doing this, there are a few important components of this at the beginning of this process. The first is identification of hazards. So you ID the hazards. What are the hazards impacting the community? And so this might sound like it's the whole vulnerability assessment. And once you've done that, you know, you've done this vulnerability assessment, but hazards identification is not the same thing as the vulnerability assessment. You will find hazards information in a local hazard mitigation plan, other resources we provided in the guide, and by talking to people in the community, and then that information goes into your analysis of vulnerabilities. The other thing is a development analysis. For most towns in New Jersey, changes to zoning is likely to be a primary strategy for reducing vulnerabilities. So there's a development analysis outlined in the guide to evaluate zoning in relation to hazards. And again, hazards includes more than just flooding, right? So we have to think about heat and wildfire and landslides, as examples of other hazards that need to be evaluated throughout this process, but really in relation to zoning because they are spatial. So this is the component where you would also do the build out analysis, which is a required component of based on the Municipal Land Use Law. And so we've outlined what we think is a pretty straightforward way to do what could be a pretty complicated thing. So we put that in the guide there. And then identification of critical facilities and other important features. It's not only pertaining to assets, because you could have other things like contaminated sites or hazardous sites that are important in terms of vulnerabilities. It is a requirement of the Municipal Land Use Law to identify critical facilities. So the community should use a broad, definition of defining what that is for critical, but in addition, other built features might be very important, but maybe not rise to the level of critical, right? So for the vulnerability assessment, any feature considered critical or important should be analyzed in the vulnerability assessment in relation to climate hazards. So we've laid out a process to be able to sort of analyze them as a group and not, go out and inspect every site and feature independently, and work through that. So the remainder of phase 4 then walks through analyzing exposure and sensitivity of features to climate hazards and evaluating the municipality's adaptive capacity to address the vulnerabilities. So this is kind of moving away from that binary understanding of vulnerability in terms of, you're inside the flood line, you're at risk, and you're outside and you're perfectly safe. It doesn't come at it from the perspective of evaluating where the hazard is, but rather at evaluating the features and the vulnerability of those features to these different hazards. So there's a detailed worksheet, several worksheets, but there's detailed worksheets in the guide to, linked in the guide to walk you through that methodology and what that looks like. So generally, vulnerability for a feature is high when exposure is high, when sensitivity to experiencing harm is high, or adaptive capacity is low. So what the guide does is provide a vulnerability key to assess these components of vulnerability, these 3 components. I'll show you that key in a second. But just something to note that this is a pretty comprehensive guide. Not everything in here will be applicable to every town because we have such a diversity of types of towns in the state. There's a lot of information in here and a lot of different hazards that may not be relevant. So that's why it's really important to have, the professionals in the community, the stakeholder input in the community, all of that is needed to be able to navigate this process so that it is data accurate for a particular community. But I just want to go back to this idea of adaptive capacity. That's what really kind of makes this a vulnerability assessment, an assessment of vulnerability, and not just a hazards analysis. So this is critical because it assesses the municipality's ability to cope with climate change in the long term, right? It's asking those questions about whether the municipality is prepared not only in, sort of response and emergency preparedness, but to make the changes that are necessary in terms of the way things are done in the municipality in order to adapt to the risks posed by climate hazards. So next, Anne is going to kind of lead us in a discussion of what that might look like and kind of what that means to improve adaptive capacity. But that's really an important component to not leave out of this assessment. And then after analyzing vulnerabilities, the next phase 5, is to identify strategies based on the analysis. And that includes strategies to improve adaptive capacity. And as I said, those strategies and design standards are a requirement of the Municipal Land Use Law. So that's that language used there. Here's what that vulnerability key looks like. I'm going to say just don't forget to give an assessment of vulnerability when you go through this process, because sometimes the vulnerability assessment does a great job, describing the hazard and describing situations, but it really doesn't say anything about a level of vulnerability. So we have this vulnerability key that's provided in the guide as a tool to help towns be able to articulate vulnerabilities and what it means. In terms of, high, moderate, low. So using the key, basically a score gets assigned to features, and that score is based on that analysis methodology laid out in part 4, and then stakeholder input and deliberations. So, you come out with these outputs, but, it's not a set algorithm. There's deliberations and conversations to have around that. And basically you assign a vulnerability ranking. So this key helps you to put scores on the hazard impact, which is exposure and sensitivity, and then on overall vulnerability, which incorporates adaptive capacity into that impact scoring. So we do have a spreadsheet. This is a screenshot of it for you to plug in and sort values and work through that and modify it as needed. So that's a tool, not a requirement, but it's something helpful for you to work through. So then the information that you've gathered through this process about vulnerabilities, about hazards, about the process itself that you use to conduct the vulnerability assessment all gets compiled into this document that is the climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment, right? So here is the template for the CCR-HVA that we've provided with the guide. It does also include all the provisions of the Municipal Land Use Law, so you can see how the regulation intersects with a comprehensive vulnerability assessment. And I'll just draw your attention to where the description of climate hazards is located. It's at the end, right? Because the vulnerability assessment, like I said, it shouldn't really be a repeat of the hazard mitigation plan. It's not a mini hazard mitigation plan. It's really focusing on the vulnerabilities in the community. So that part comes up front. And then additionally, since this will go on to be, a part of the master plan, it is expected that the municipal planner will play a big role in kind of working on this document, creating the actual vulnerability assessment document so that it can get integrated into the master plan, even if other people are contributing throughout the process. So there are various parts of this process outlined in this guide, and to do the vulnerability assessment that can be conducted through various roles. But just remember that this is really meant to go into the master plan and into informing all of the planning and design and decisions made in the community. So in this guide, we provide this template for the vulnerability assessment to be a standalone document. We are also working on a version for integration into the master plan. So you can look for that in a few months. And then that's ultimately the purpose of this vulnerability assessment, right? So we can kind of get this into our planning and proactively do some things. So the last phase of the guide, I just have 2 more slides, is to get you started really on acting on the information that you learn in the vulnerability assessment, right? Once you do it, you've learned all this stuff. So it's really important to do that follow through to make sure that the vulnerability assessment does get integrated into all the plans and policies and regulations and decisions. The guide does include a sample policy statement on the consistency, coordination, and integration of the vulnerability assessment with other plans. And such a policy statement is required by the Municipal Land Use Law. It is actually in the other phase of the guide, because all of the things regarding the Municipal Land Use Law are kept together. I'm just presenting it with phase 6 in this presentation because that made the most sense for the presentation. But there is a sample policy statement related to the MLUL that you can use and modify for a community. Lastly, I'll just wrap up by saying that, we've got this one-stop shop resource for how to do a vulnerability assessment and protect and strengthen all the key features and systems that support a community. So please reach out, get started, at least look into this and think about how you can get working on it. When you do work on it, please, give us some feedback, right? Download the guide, provide your perspective about resilience planning through our very brief survey when you do download it, and then you can provide feedback on the guide when we may contact you when we do our follow-up. You can always email me directly, twarback@njfuture.org. So now I'm going to pass it over to Anne, and she's going to lead us in a discussion.
All right. I hope that's correct.
Other screen, Anne.
Okay. Better?
Nope, same thing.
Huh,
It's
that's
in
weird.
your-
All right, let me did that work?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Tanya and Megan and the New Jersey Coastal Collaborative. It's great to have an opportunity to chat with you today. And as we said, I'm Ann Heasley, Program Manager for Policy and Planning. And before we get into sort of the coffee chat part of this, I just want to spend a minute talking about some of the resources that we have at Sustainable Jersey to do this work. So I'm hoping that many of you already know about our program. We have a nonprofit organization that's run out of the Sustainability Institute at the College of New Jersey. We provide tools and training and financial incentives to help municipalities be more sustainable. And we have a schools program and a municipal program. And I'm mostly going to talk about the municipal program, but I do want to mention that our schools program has climate change education information to help municipalities, to help schools that are working on that as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have, what we call our actions. And we were able to update our actions briefly in 2022 with support from the DEP to sort of look at what you could do now. This was in advance of working on the guide that Tanya just talked about, but it's still relevant today because, while we'd like to have every municipality undertake a vulnerability assessment right now, we know that may not happen. Some of you may have already just recently updated your master plan, so you won't be doing this work for a while. There is no sort of timeline on when this work needs to be done in the MLUL law. So, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that you can do now. So we do have tools for sort of understanding your vulnerability to the impacts of heat islands with our heat island assessment and mitigation action. If you know that you have large areas of impervious cover, you may want to take action now and implement green infrastructure, sort of to retrofit your community. Or if you're seeing that you have a lot of issues with stormwater, many municipalities do, you may want to strengthen your stormwater management control ordinance, which is something that you can do to better manage future stormwater related to new developments. So all of these things can help your municipality really advance in responding to climate change if you don't decide to do the vulnerability assessment. But it also could help you get an understanding of some of your vulnerabilities too. So obviously this guide is a great place to start. And with some funding that we've received from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the next year we're going to be taking the guide and trying to develop a gold star in our program, which would be sort of an additional level of recognition for municipalities that really sort of tackle and try to become climate ready. So I hope to share that with you maybe next year at this time. So as we start to think about the poll questions, what we pulled together here is some of the things that we think you need to think about in terms of the adaptive capacity. Tanya described that as one of the key parts of the vulnerability assessment. And so, how do you evaluate your community's ability to respond to climate change and your municipal structure and all the other sort of structures that support your community? So, we want you to think beyond those quick fixes, which those are important, but we are also wanting you to sort of drill down and think about fundamental change. And as the sticker says, it's not climate change, it's everything change. So for the purposes of this poll, we know it's really exciting to see so many people, and we know you represent a lot of different roles in a community, but you all live in a municipality. So if you're representing a municipality, please answer these questions related to the municipality that you work for, or the municipality that you may be a consultant to, or the municipality that you live in. So let's begin thinking about what your community needs to improve its adaptive capacity. So we'll go ahead with the first question, and Amanda's going to launch the poll. And really the first question is, does your community have a designated staff person that's responsible to continually assess the municipality's vulnerability, climate hazards? And then, so yes, no, unsure. And then the second question, are there multiple people in your community serving a role and assessing your municipality's vulnerability to climate change? And this could be a lot of different people that live or work in your community. And after we see the poll looks like it's pretty filled out. It looks like we're still working on it. We'll close it and hopefully get some chatting going on for a few minutes here.
Yeah, and I just want to mention to the group that this is now an opportunity. If you have questions or you want to talk more about these poll questions, you can come off mute, you can raise your hand. You can also ask questions in the chat, and this is your opportunity to kind of be interactive with some of our panel speakers. So I'll let you all fill out the poll. We have about 28 people who've answered so far.
Yeah, it looks like it's slowed down. Maybe we'll just go ahead and end it. Oh, no, people are still sneaking in.
Does it show the results?
I don't see those yet.
Yeah.
Do I need to stop sharing?
I'm not quite sure.
Share results.
We could see them.
Okay, awesome. So
Yes.
the audience can see the results.
So Anne, do you need us to read out the results?
Yeah,
So
because I
we-
can't see
we've got-
those.
For question number one, a designated staff person in the municipality, 14% say yes, 34% say no, and 52% say unsure. So mostly unsure, and then no, not a single person designated, and a few have a person designated. So kudos to you folks. And then for the number two, multiple people serving the role. And 41% say yes, and 21% say no, and 38% say unsure. So that's kind of mixed.
Yeah, and maybe we'll just because we are like getting close, maybe we'll just go ahead and go through the polls and then have a general discussion. So the next, and also because I can't figure out how to go back. So the next one is really about another sort of component of adaptive capacity, or things that you need to think about, is just not only in your municipality, but looking across those municipal boundaries, because we know climate change doesn't stop at any boundary. So, are there any procedures or mechanisms that your municipality has used in the past that might be a model to problem solve across the municipal boundary? And if you have done something like that, did it reduce harm from climate change?
So we have folks answering the questions.
It looks like, and to question number one, no is leading in responses with 53% people saying no, and then it's split between yes and unsure, 24%. And then number two, so far, we have most people being unsure, 47%, as to whether that approach reduced harm to climate change. But about 30% no and 20% yes. Still moving a little bit, but
Yeah.
mostly unsure.
Yeah.
So not sure if the relationship between, you know, action and reducing harm from climate change is the dominant response now at 57%.
Okay, and maybe if you have an example, if you can just put a notation in the chat, that would be great. And then maybe if we have a couple of minutes at the end here to, you know, discuss that, that would be really great to hear from you. And then we'll just launch, go ahead and end this poll and launch that last one. You know, Tanya mentioned that, you know, the point of this vulnerability assessment is to really focus on your master plan and your master plan update. And one of the important things that your master plan does is it is supposed to inform your capital improvement planning. So this question really goes to, does your community develop a capital improvement plan? Does it sort of create a list of short and long-term funding needs and you know, either for maintenance or development or improvements? And if so, does it include things that would, you know, help your community adapt to climate change?
So, so far, a lot of responses for yes to the first question. Means having a capital improvement plan. A lot of towns don't, so that's great. We got 69% saying yes, they do, and 24% unsure. So far, and number two, does it include climate adaptation programs? 24% say yes, 29% say no, and 47% unsure.
That's great. All right, let me just share one more slide and then we'll just maybe stop sharing screens and make it more of a conversation here. And that is just to share with you. So again, you know, Tanya mentioned that the guide walks you through assessing your vulnerability. And, you know, it's really important to do that last step of, you know, looking at your exposure, your vulnerability, and then your adaptive capacity. So one of the tools to do that is, it was in her slides, but also here, and I think we can put it in the chat, is one of the worksheets 4.1C, you know, which really hones in on some of these questions that we've just talked about with you, to start to think about, you know, do you have the right people and the knowledge and the skills to really meet the needs short-term and long-term. And then also, Tanya mentioned, you know, earlier on is sort of developing that project team. So yeah, maybe it's not one person, maybe it's a group of people in your community that bring different skills to the table. So making sure when you put together your team to do your vulnerability assessment and hopefully long-term your adaptation to it, that you know, that you have sort of thought that through. So that's what the project team selection worksheet 3.1 helps you do. So, you know, you may not have all the resources in one area. You may need to strengthen others. You know, we don't think that you're going to need to, you're not going to be able to do this alone. You're going to need to think about working with your neighboring communities. And, you know, maybe some of this has already been done in your community at some level and just needs to be enhanced. And we hope that that guide helps you, you know, tweak what's going on in your community as well as build your capacity. And we just know if you don't start having these conversations, if you don't start asking these questions, we don't think you're going to be able to really make the change that's required. So with that, I'll stop sharing and maybe we can just open it up for questions and more discussion.
Yeah, and we do have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll start off with Noah Slovin from SLR International Consulting. His question says, has New Jersey or have communities tied these efforts to their hazard mitigation plans and or CRS programs?
Okay,
It would
so
be great if we had a tracking mechanism. So there, we are always trying to get information. That's kind of one of our asks. That'll be in a follow-up survey. You know, about you know, the experience and the process that folks are going through to do this work, right? So I think a lot of times just getting off the ground with figuring out what to do, how to do it. The professionals are still figuring out what to do, how to do it. But there is absolutely 100% a recognition of the intersection. And so in our guide, we do talk about that, but to not make it even more pages, there's not a full in-depth discussion on how to do that. Yes, I would say that the folks that we're talking to on both the hazard mitigation side and also the planning side recognize that these efforts need to talk to each other, but they are different. They have different purposes, different outcomes, different inputs. But is overlap. So ultimately they need to inform each other and be have a synergy there, right? That really works together for climate change. So that is kind of next phase, like how exactly do we do that? But if anybody has information on, you know, examples, please share. But we don't have any concrete yet that I know of specifics.
yeah, no, I don't think we have any concrete examples, but I think, you know, the idea that if a community has done this vulnerability assessment, it can really inform their next county, you know, inform their participation in their county's hazard mitigation plan, because they will bring additional visibility to sort of what's really important in their community.
We have another question in the chat from Stan. Will NJDEP require municipalities to follow the NJ Future Guidance document and its recommended worksheets as the scope of work, any future funding programs supporting the creation of municipal CCRHVAs?
Yes, that one's for me. No, DEP will not require a municipality to use the New Jersey Future Guidance. You know, when it comes to vulnerability assessments, there are probably very different ways that a town can go about getting the results that they need. I think towns are gonna have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. However, I can tell you that the New Jersey Future Guidance is very thorough and well put together. It's a very well put together document. So I think you will get the answers you need and have a very thorough and useful vulnerability assessment by the time you go through the process. But as far as requirement goes, no.
Do we have any more questions for our panelist speakers before we end today? Okay, from Sarah. Does the group have any examples of incorporating climate change expertise into procurement of municipal engineering services? Our contract engineer is good, but at the end of the day, their funding and bandwidth is limited, and we need their expertise to be informed by climate change.
So we're just getting into conversations again around training, and we're looking for the resources to provide training to you know, the workforce that really needs to understand how to do this and how to think about this in the context of work that already gets done, like engineering and building stuff, also planning, but also lots of things intersect with this. So that's a great question. And we are not at that point yet, but it's definitely something that we want to move forward on. And again, anyone has any suggestions or, you know, wants to work with us on that, we are trying to get training set up for this.
Thank you, Tanya. And I just put in your contact information for anybody who wants to reach out individually to our panelists today. I want to thank them for taking the time to present this material. like I said, their information is listed on the slide if you're interested in reaching out. At the end of today's chat, you will receive a link for a post-event evaluation. New Jersey Future and Sustainable Jersey are looking for municipalities to collaborate with by using this guide in their vulnerability assessment planning. So you may share your interest in that survey along with your feedback, and we would love to hear from you. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.